Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today, mostly because the data we're looking at is going to completely reframe how we view getting older. For decades, we've basically been handed this really specific and, frankly, kind of gloomy script about what happens the second we hit our 40s and 50s. But the latest scientific data and adult development research, they are telling a drastically different, deeply empowering story. So if you've ever felt a creeping sense of dread about aging, or if you're just curious about the actual psychology behind adult development, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it.
Right off the bat, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to really think about this for a second. Is the famous midlife crisis actually real? Like, is it a hardwired biological fact of human aging? Or is it just a really, really well-marketed pop psychology myth? I mean, we see it in movies all the time, right? The sudden sports car purchase, the radical out-of-nowhere career change, that overwhelming sense of impending doom. We treat it like an absolute inevitability. But what if the data says otherwise?
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, Debunking the Midlife Crisis.
To really understand where we're going, we kind of need to look at where this whole idea even came from. It's crazy, but the midlife crisis wasn't discovered in a lab by scientists. It was literally just an idea floated by a popular writer back in the late 1970s, and it just somehow became entrenched in our culture as an absolute fact. For years, dozens of researchers who study human development have peered through their data trying to validate this concept, only to consistently conclude that there is zero evidence to support a universal midlife crisis. Now, what's really interesting is how this scientific consensus has evolved over time. For a long while, the one big exception holding up this myth was a 2008 study. That study claimed happiness takes a U-shape across our lifespan, meaning it dips dangerously low in middle age before rebounding later. But just recently, in 2025, incredible new comprehensive data released in the journal PLOS One declared that this U-shape has completely vanished. Literally, it's gone. Instead of a dip, researchers are increasingly seeing an upward sloping line, meaning our happiness and well-being can actually increase as we age.
So the crucial point here is understanding why that old data misled us so badly. Well, the old U-curve had some seriously messy problems. First off, the dip was so tiny in magnitude that it was honestly more of a wobble than a drop. On a 10-point happiness scale, the absolute lowest score was still in the low sevens. That's basically a solid C on a test. That is hardly a crisis. Second, the data was strictly cross-sectional. That means they were comparing totally different age groups at one moment in time, rather than tracking the same individuals over the course of their lives. And finally, newer data shows that massive external factors, like the COVID-19 pandemic and heavy smartphone use, heavily skewed the well-being of younger adults downward, which effectively erased that old curve anyway. So, adult development researchers have confidently and permanently put the universal midlife crisis myth to rest.
Let's move right along to Section 2, Welcome to Middlescence.
Now that we've cleared away the old, dusty myth of the midlife crisis, we desperately need a new framework. If it's not a crisis, then what on earth is it? Well, welcome to a totally new, scientifically backed, and incredibly empowering paradigm for this stage of life. I absolutely love this quote from Barbara Waxman. She's a gerontologist and an advisory board member for Stanford Lifestyle Medicine, and she says, rather than a midlife crisis, I call this time in our lives a midlife reckoning. Just think about the massive shift in tone there for a second. A crisis is something that happens to you. It's just a storm you have to survive. But a reckoning? That is active. It's an intentional accounting of exactly where you are, and it's an opportunity to rewrite your script and recalibrate your ongoing commitment to your life's purpose.
Waxman actually coined a fantastic term for this specific life stage, Middlescence. You know how adolescence is a widely recognized period of intense transition and growth? Well, Middlescence is exactly that, but for the period between early and later midlife. It's defined by major, totally natural life transitions. Things like physical changes, your kids finally leaving home, or maybe taking on the caretaking of your aging parents. This is not the beginning of the end. Let's be clear on that. It is a dedicated life stage that's perfectly suited to reevaluating how you spend your time, exploring brand new paths, and declaring a fresh purpose based on who you are now rather than who you were at 20.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, Big and Little Purposes.
So the big question is, how exactly do we reorient our lives during Middlescence? The Stanford Lifestyle Medicine article highlights that it really all comes down to examining our concept of purpose. But let's be honest, purpose is a super loaded word.
So many people struggle to find their purpose, and they actually end up feeling this deep sense of shame or anxiety when they can't pinpoint it. We need to alleviate that pressure immediately, and we do that by distinguishing between the big P and the little p. People put so much incredible stress on themselves to find this grandiose big P purpose, saving the environment, ending world hunger, revolutionizing an entire industry. But in doing so, they completely overlook their little p purposes. These are the small, essential daily contributions: cooking a healthy meal for your family, mentoring a junior colleague at work, or honestly, just calling a loved one to check in. The true magic of Middlesense is realizing that these little P's compound. They add up day by day to create a profoundly purposeful life.
To really anchor this idea, Waxman often shares this beautiful quote from Mother Teresa. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. I love that so much because it completely relieves the immense pressure of needing a grandiose world-changing destiny. Your purpose doesn't have to end up on the front page of a newspaper to be incredibly valuable and deeply, deeply fulfilling. Now, if you want to start defining your own purpose right now, Waxman offers a highly practical 3-step journaling process that you can do today. Step 1, just ask yourself, what sparked joy today? Start super small. Step 2, what is a skill you have that relates to this joy? These first 2 steps are absolutely perfect for helping you identify those little p purposes we talked about. And then, step 3, what need in your community or the world at large does this skill fulfill? So for example, if gardening sparked joy for you today and you have a skill for cooking, maybe you volunteer to help at a local soup kitchen. You see how that works? Steps 1 and 2 naturally, organically lead you right to a big P purpose without forcing it.
Moving on to section 4, the power of acceptance.
Now look, even with a great sense of purpose, life transitions are just hard. Middlesense comes with real, undeniable stress. So let's shift gears to look at some hard clinical data from a brilliant 2025 study. It was published in the Asia-Pacific Journal of Convergent Research Interchange, and it looked exactly at how to handle the anxiety that naturally comes with midlife transitions. And the best part? This study didn't just rely on loose anecdotes. They analyzed exactly 300 middle-aged men, aged 40 to 64, using a highly detailed structural equation model. The researchers wanted to see precisely how certain psychological traits impact the intensity of what people experience as a midlife crisis. And the data they uncovered is incredibly actionable for every single one of us. The researchers basically contrasted 2 distinct ways of handling stress: psychological acceptance versus experiential avoidance. Now, experiential avoidance is exactly what it sounds like. It's when we actively run from our internal distress. We try to ignore the physical changes of aging, or we constantly distract ourselves to avoid dealing with empty nest syndrome. And guess what? The study found that doing this makes the crisis significantly worse. Psychological acceptance, on the other hand, is the ability to just accept our changing reality and the stress that accompanies it without judgment. You're not fighting it. The data definitively proves that this kind of acceptance is a highly powerful therapeutic alternative that directly and measurably lowers the feeling of crisis.
Finally, let's look at section 5, mindfulness in the middle.
So here's the catch. How do you actually achieve psychological acceptance? Because let's be real, you can't just flip a switch in your brain and say, okay, I accept everything now, right? Well, the researchers identified an active tool that bridges the gap between trying to accept your reality and actually lowering your sense of crisis. And that tool is mindfulness. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what's happening. It might look a bit academic at first glance, but it humanizes the data perfectly. On the far left, you have acceptance. The arrows show that acceptance leads upward directly to mindfulness and downward to self-compassion. Then if you follow the arrows to the right, they point directly to a reduced midlife crisis. It literally shows exactly how your brain navigates stress. When you practice acceptance, you naturally become more mindful, and that active state of mindfulness is what actively diffuses the crisis. So boiling all that data down, a few totally fascinating takeaways emerge. Number 1, high psychological acceptance directly lowers the feeling of a midlife crisis. Number 2, acceptance naturally boosts your mindfulness, which is just your ability to stay present. Number 3, that higher state of mindfulness acts as a mediator to further reduce the crisis. And this last one is super interesting. While self-compassion does increase, the data showed it actually wasn't the primary driver in reducing the crisis on its own. The real heroes here, the absolute game changers, are accepting your changing reality and just staying completely present in the moment through mindfulness.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a ton of ground today, from totally debunking that gloomy myth of the midlife crisis to embracing this exciting, empowering stage of Middlesense, finding your little p purpose, and using actual science-backed acceptance and mindfulness to navigate life's transitions. So I want to end this explainer with a highly provocative question from the incredible poet Mary Oliver, which was famously quoted in the Stanford article. She asks, "What is it you plan to do with your wild and precious life?" Remember, Middlesense is your reckoning. That old, tired script is gone. You literally have decades of life and leadership sitting right in front of you. So how will you rewrite your story? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I truly hope you leave here today feeling ready to embrace the magic of your own middle.